Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features the Uncanny X-Men number 179, cover dated March 1984. The cover here by John Romita Jr. and Dan Green, featuring Kitty Pryde looking delighted there on her wedding day to Caliban of the Morlocks. So a pretty unusual cover, but really visually striking, and every teenage girl's nightmare, having to marry somebody as handsome as Caliban, yes. So let's open this one up to the inside, because at the end of the previous issue, we were shown an image of someone who looked like Kitty Pryde that had apparently fallen to her death, pushed or jumped from the top of the Baxter building. But the zoom in here shows us that Kitty is not dead, and instead she is being groomed and dressed for a big wedding to Caliban. So the title of the story here is What Happened to Kitty, and the creative team is Chris Claremont, writer. And then interesting, the credits here, John Romita Jr. and Dan Green credited as artists. The rest of the creative team, Tom Warzakowski, letterer, and Glenn Swine, colorist. Now, this is the beginning of the John Romita Jr. Dan Green collaboration. The way that worked, John Romita Jr. was instructed to provide breakdowns only, and Dan Green finished and polished the art in ink. And this was because it was believed by the likes of Chris Claremont that John Romita Jr. wasn't ready to provide full pencils on the basis of the work he'd done in the concluding 8 pages of issue 175 and the 3 previous issues. And I've got a quote here for you from an interview with Chris Claremont. The interviewer was Tom DeFalco. And the question that DeFalco asked Claremont is, after Paul Smith, John Romita Jr. took over penciling X-Men, right? And Claremont says, right, I think Johnny, at the point he was drawing the book, was still a work in progress. He was evolving into the Johnny we know today, the Johnny capable of doing the work he did with Frank Miller on Daredevil, The Man Without Fear. While his term on X-Men was successful, I think it was more along the lines of refining his craft and planting the seeds of what was to blossom into something really magnificent on other books. We were sort of like Johnny's farm team. So that was part of Dan Green's role to improve Romita Jr.'s breakdown pencils so that they would look as well as these pages do. And of course, Dan Green would remain on the book through Mark Silvestri's run on the title, all the way up to issue 261. So Dan Green is going to be really the key person providing visual continuity to Claremont's X-Men from 1984 to 1990, really. So here we have Kitty readied for this marriage, and then our scene switches to Bellevue Hospital in Manhattan, and we have the trio of Wolverine, Rogue, and Aurora, who've arrived at the morgue in the hospital. And this doctor pulls out the body on the tray and removes the covering from the body and says to them, for the record, do you recognize her? And Storm comes over and says her name is Kitty Pryde. But of course, how can it be? So we saw in the previous issue Callisto, Mask, and Sunder pick a dead woman's body from an alley in the Lower East Side, and Mask uses his powers to turn, as it turns out now, that young woman's body to a resemblance of Kitty Pryde. Storm thinks here the Baxter building is the headquarters of the Fantastic Four. What was she doing there? How could this have happened? And the narrative captions continue. Storm's face is a stoic mask, the depth of her grief betrayed only by a trembling hand, and a bolt of lightning that turns the night sky to day, followed by a boom of thunder that shatters windows and shakes buildings to their very cores. A nice use of a colour hold here as well, indicating that bolt of lightning. So the doctor hears it down in the morgue, and Wolverine says to him, why don't you treat yourself to a look at the thunderstorm? And the doctor replies, sorry, can't leave visitors alone in the morgue, against the rules. This once, bend them a little, says Wolverine, and it looks like he means business. this is a great image, great panel here, great art on these pages. And again, it's Dan Green's contribution really elevating Romita Jr.'s pencils. So the Doctor walks off and he thinks to himself, if I stall a little, maybe they'll be gone when I get back. I sure hope so. And then Wolverine reveals why he wanted the man out of the way. Some things are better said in private. This ain't Kitty. So Rogue is aghast. You're crazy, Wolverine. He says, maybe, but I'm also right. The kid may have Kitty's face and outfit. She may be a perfect match, right down to finger and retinal prints, but it's not her. Sense wrong. Even as he lights up in a hospital. Good old Wolverine, eh? And so Storm begins to think what might have occurred. And she says, Kitty, a prisoner, with her captors free to do with her what they wished without fear of discovery. The plan would have worked too, save that they never met Wolverine, nor reckoned with his enhanced senses. She pegs the Morlocks for the abduction of Kitty. And the Morlocks never met Wolverine. And so this now is interesting in terms of what they might do to get Kitty back. And then our scene switches to an hour's drive upstate. That's the X-Mansion. And we've got Nightcrawler here using a stethoscope to check for Colossus's heartbeat. And he says to Professor X, I can't hear a heartbeat, Professor. But when Peter is armoured, I'm not even sure he has one. And he thinks to himself, the bioscans aren't picking up any positive readings either. Suppose he's alive. Suppose we restore him to human form. What then? His steel body is deeply scarred and pitted. The organic analogue would be wounds too terrible for anyone to survive. So this is what happened to Colossus at the end of issue 177 when he was superheated by Pyro of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants and then covered with liquid nitrogen by the stratagem of Avalanche of the Brotherhood 2. So Professor X responds. We've got Amanda Sefton here comforting Colossus's sister Ileana, and the professor says, what alternative have we, Kurt? We cannot give up. So what happens now is the professor is getting a telepathic message from Storm in the city, and she communicates to the professor, Wolverine insists the slain girl is not Kitty, but a perfect duplication. I'm inclined to agree. And she says, I believe I know who's responsible and where they have taken Kitty. So the professor here is shocked. Now, this kind of ties up a little bit with Claremont's comment on John Romita Jr. not being quite ready for prime time. So just look at the professor's big head here. It's gigantic sized, and we can see what he's going for, trying to work in Storm's face into the shadow on the professor's forehead, but it just doesn't quite work. It's an interesting idea, and then something else intriguing happens. The professor bends double in pain, and it turns out that he is being the subject of a massive, irresistible blast of psychic energy. So it would turn out that what's happening there is that an extraterrestrial source, so he says here, the scanning wave of extraterrestrial origin, he encountered it before in the previous issue, turns out to be the Beyonder, who was scanning the Earth telepathically in advance of the upcoming Secret Wars limited series and the Beyonder's entrance into the Marvel Universe. So Nightcrawler's there looking to help the professor, and then our scene switches to the Morlock tunnels, and Kitty's readied for the wedding, but she's seeing things from an interesting perspective, seeing the Morlocks looking more classically human, and then there is the arrival of the dashing, handsome, heroic prince. Face flushed with excitement, eyes alight with joy, Kitty looks up to behold the man who's won her heart, and this is what she sees, only to have words of greeting gag in her throat as the last vestiges of a Morlock mind spell drop away. So she's horrified, and she pushes Caliban away, but she is restrained by the Morlocks, and Sunder brings her to before Callisto. And Callisto then tells her that the X-Men regrettably think she's dead. Besides, even if Aurora knew the truth, she couldn't help you. We haven't violated her precious rules much as we'd like to. We've returned one of our own to the fold, so she might pay her debts and fulfill a solemn obligation. What are you talking about? Asks Kitty. And then Callisto gets to the point of it. How quickly some forget, did you or did you not promise that if Caliban aided the X-Men against me, you would stay with him forever? So Kitty has to agree yes, and that she didn't. That he carried out his part of the bargain, and now it's her turn, as Callisto says. And since it wouldn't be proper to have you two living in sin, you'll have to marry. But Kitty's concerned about Colossus. She says, Callisto, he was badly wounded by the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. He may be dying. The only means of saving him. That's the gizmo she took from Reed Richards' lab in the Baxter building. You have to let me go. And Callisto mocks her. Do you promise to come back? Yes. You give your word? Oh, yes. That's what you said last time to Caliban. You lied then. Why should we believe you now? So Kitty's got no answer for that. And then she just runs through the tunnels. But she thinks they're letting her go because they know that she doesn't know her way out of the tunnels. And great artwork on these pages. Great combination of the storytelling, the inks, Anglinus Oliver's colours to render the murky, grimy dirt and filth of the Morlock sewers and tunnels. And so Kitty falls face down into the sewage water. She can't phase, can't run. All she's able to do is cry. So why can't she phase? And then she sees this figure wandering in the tunnel who says he's lost, lonely and scared. And Kitty thinks he's talking about himself for me. He's so ugly, he has to be a Morlock. He sounds awfully young. I should leave him. I should keep running. But how far do I go to get away from my conscience? Because she's been thinking guiltily about the promise she made Caliban, and how if she is to adhere to her principles of right and wrong, she has to fulfill her obligation, keep her promise. And this is the first appearance of Leech in the comics, and we're going to see another Morlock make his first appearance a little later in the issue too. So then we're back in Morlock Alley, and Leech has brought Kitty before Callisto once more, and then it's time to get Kitty ready again for the marriage ceremony. And at this point it's interesting, Mask comes forward and says, we outcast outlaws. This symbolizes rejection by you of life you led, world you knew, people you loved. Will it hurt? Does it matter, he says as he reaches out to touch her face. And Mask's power is to manipulate flesh. So he changes in this horrifying sequence of these narrow vertical panels Kitty's face into a resemblance of his own, Callisto, Caliban, and then Storm. And it's when her face is turned to Storm's that she's most horrified, because of course at this point she's very upset with Storm for Storm's change of identity when she came back from Tokyo. And also then he gives her this blank face, but he concludes by saying, or she says to him, leave me alone, I'm not some toy, a doll for you to play with, I'm a human being. What's that make me? Something different? He asks. And then he once again lays hands on her and turns her face into a horrifying nest of tumors. And Callisto interrupts, tells him to make her face normal again so she can breathe at least. And now begins the marriage ceremony. And she begins reading from the book of Morlock law. And she says, the kid's giving up everything she holds dear. We may not like her, but we have to respect her courage. I didn't think she had it in her. I hear any objections to our pretty kitty or this wedding. Speak now or forever hold your peace. And of course there is an objection. And it comes from Storm, who in some ways, after Kitty's parents' divorce, is Kitty's kind of foster mother, or mother figure at least. And we've got Wolverine here, claws popped, and Rogue too. But Storm tells Wolverine to back off and says, I lead the Morlocks, leave this to me. So Kitty protests, Storm, stay out of this. I'm not being forced, I'm doing this of my own free will. Storm doesn't listen to her and uses her powers against Callisto. And now we have a rematch of their former battle, with Callisto leaping on Storm to kill her. And here they are grappling over right to lead the Morlocks. Callisto says, I want what's mine by right. And Storm has lost her powers, Rogue too, by proximity to leech, because that's his power, to leech the powers of any mutant. Not just, he doesn't have to physically touch them, just be in physical proximity. But Wolverine makes the point here, Bub, you made a big bad mistake with me. These claws are mechanical, they got nothing to do with my powers, they still work. But Kitty restrains Wolverine from attacking the Morlocks, and she orders him to sheathe his claws and protests, did you ever consider asking if I wanted to be rescued? Or is this just a convenient excuse to bash in some skulls? She asks. This mess is my fault. She's taking responsibility, my responsibility, and it's up to me alone to resolve it. I've brought enough people pain. I won't be party to causing any more. Colossus is what's important. With the Morlock's help, we might have a way to save him. But if he doesn't matter, you'd rather rip each other's hearts out? What the heck, go right ahead. So Storm asks for forgiveness. Callisto's delighted that Storm's been shown up in Kitty's eyes again. And then she says, we've an agreement with the X-Men. We mean to keep it. So here's the first appearance of the Morlock healer. And so we're going to have him involved in getting Colossus out of this situation. So the plan is Kitty's, to use Rogue's power to absorb Colossus's power, and then to have the Morlock healer on hand to aid with the wounds that will appear on Colossus's flesh body once he transforms back to flesh. And Storm thinks here, with the pain that Rogue has endured, Goddess, the poor child, whatever her past, this has earned her place with us. And so this is something that's been resolved in these issues since 171 and Rogue joining the team. More and more they're coming around to accepting her as one of their own, and no longer having those doubts about her given her past. So then the Morlock healer uses his powers on Peter, and we're told in the narrative captions, the moment Peter Rasputin becomes human, blood pours from scores of wounds. He's seconds to live, but the Morlock healer's touch extends that to minutes, then to years, and finally to the young Russian's allotted span. So it's done. And then all that's left is for Kitty to fulfill her promise. So Illyana goes with her to one of the subways in Manhattan, and Kitty's got a couple of letters that she wants Illyana to give to her mum and dad and to Peter. And then she hugs goodbye to Illyana, and she says, I gotta go. And she thinks to herself, I wonder if I'll ever get used to how dark and cold it is down here. And then Caliban is there to meet her, and he recognizes that she's sad and asks her, does she miss the sun? And she says, it's my world, Caliban, at least it was. Now your world is mine, and your life, who knows? With a little luck, maybe we'll live happily ever after. Last page, how's it going to get resolved? Well, Caliban understands what he did not before. He says that your place is in the sun, while his is in shadow. For all that Caliban loves you, to force you to his side would be wrong. You're not? Does Kitty Pryde love Caliban? He asks. No, she responds. And Caliban says, Caliban's love is so strong, it makes him so crazy, he thinks he must let you leave, in hopes that someday you will return of your own truly free will, or that he might find courage to live once more in the sunlight. So Kitty's delighted, obviously. I don't know if I'll ever feel that way about you, Caliban, but I would be proud and honoured to call you my friend. And that's how they part, but he gives her a wedding gift, a single red rose, and he concludes by saying, when you look at it, remember him kindly, not as the Morlock monster, but as the prince. So an interesting twist on the Beauty and the Beast myth in this particular issue, and a great debut by Dan Green as a finisher over John Romita Jr.'s breakdowns on this particular issue. So Rogue answers the letters page for this particular issue, and it's fitting because the letters concern issue 171, where she joined the X-Men. And there you go. I do hope that you enjoyed this review and commentary on Uncanny X-Men 179. If you liked it, please like the video on YouTube, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content like this.